in the vast majority of firms that we work with at Dynasty, the person in charge of that company is probably a first-time CEO. And so how do they transition from being the advisor of what can be a very complex advisor team to being the CEO of a complex, diversified organization? And I think it's always important to kind of figure out what the end goal should be. And I think the end goal of how do you know when you've really made progress on that point is when the growth and the decision-making of a company has really kind of evolved outside of a core group of founding partners or personalities. That's when you really can see different RIAs begin to really kick into that higher level of growth and really become professional organizations. I'd say in terms of the key areas where you really see perhaps the most gap is, first of all, bringing everybody onto the one vision. Often when you grow an RIA, you're bringing on maybe multiple advisor teams. They've all got their own personal flair, their own personal experience. How do you bring them all towards one cohesive vision to help grow the company and create an excellent client experience? So an awful lot of it does come down to building consensus within the organization. Then I think another kind of key area is really around building your executive leadership. Yes, you've got a team of fantastic advisors and fantastic client-facing staff, but you also need superstars in the executive areas. Things like compliance, things like operations, things like marketing, things like talent management. You need to, with the same kind of high level of standards that you have for recruiting advisors, you need to have that same level of standards to build that executive team. And it's important to also know, like, as you grow, how do you do that at the right time? When's the right time to hire for some of these roles? When is the right time to make the investment? Like, these people are not free. You need to make that strategic investment, but it's a classic area where if you make that investment in the short term, it can pay off to the long term. When we're working with CEOs and helping them make that transition from being, an advisor to being a CEO, if we see some firms that perhaps haven't been able to make that leap, it's normally down to a few kind of key things. First of all, it's important to kind of put yourself in their seat. And it often comes down to clients. They feel that their personal involvement is too crucial to the client relationships. They feel that if they were to step away from that relationship, the clients would leave. And that might be true. And it's important to kind of build that around, build a service model around that. So, for example, we work with many firms where you're building a service model that in the eyes of the client, you are involved at the key points. But in reality, behind the scenes, an awful lot of the work and prep and everything is done for you by your team. And so building out all those workflows and service models is a big part of what we do. I think also it really comes down to that perhaps perceived lack of talent in the leadership and that executive leadership. And I think really that is where you have to make that strategic investments early in both time and money and equity as well. In many ways, you have to think 10 years ahead. There's an old GE story that once you're made the CEO of GE, apparently the board says your number one job is to find your successor. And you should be thinking about that. You should be thinking about who, over the course of the next 10 years, might be your leaders. If you can't identify that person in your workforce right now, you perhaps need to look outside and start to build out those capabilities, and also what development do those individuals now need to go through throughout the whole of that as well.